aided, I must confess, by the discovery that my co-driver had a few tips up his sleeve about driving with diff lock and low ratio gears. If you haven't done it before, keeping your feet off everything coming downhill is quite daunting at first. But no problems this time, it was a breeze. Some old hands had actually complained about the lack of mud. Then they saw this log test. Rivalry put aside, we all discussed tactics.
What's to stop you putting some stones at the front?
Oh, no.
Why not?
What are we going to do?
Well, I suppose it's ingenuity, isn't it?
Put some rocks at the front.
Anyway, you go first. Steve Ovett and Murray Grierson in their Toyota had no problems. With ground clearance like that, it was easy. After watching the others carefully, my technique was okay. But the Land Rover's low-slung belly was to be a sticking point. I had mixed feelings about that push. I needed it, but it cost valuable points. Trouble was, I had to start catching up just as things got more challenging. And I was receiving less than total support from my teammates.
15, 1-5.
Don't worry, it'll be fine.
We've got
10.
complete faith in you.
Would you say no brakes at all? And that's what put me off. At least that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, let it go in the rocks. Let it go in the rocks. That's all right.
What a disaster. I tore up my scorecard at this point, which was actually rather liberating, and concentrated instead on enjoying the driving and the terrain, especially those long woodland paths and the almost dry riverbeds. Did I say dry? Not happy with just finding water at last, the organisers felt the need to add extra obstacles too. And rules are rules. Everyone, including the drivers, had to get wet feet. But how's that for style? Steve Ovett's team provided entertainment. We found out why Steve himself normally runs on the flat. And at least we'd done it without a macho show of brute force. I was really enjoying this game by now.
What's that strange buzzing noise?
I'd spoken too soon. The heart of my poor, faithful workhorse had died. And in a final ironic twist, we had to be rescued by the very people the event was meant to be in aid of. The Canine Defence League.
The man driving this car is in the Guinness Book of Records as the oldest driver in Britain at 100 years of age. He's Roland Power. There are 10 million drivers over 55 in Britain now. That's 1/3 of all licence holders. Despite the commonly held belief that older people are safer because they're more experienced, there's now growing evidence to suggest that they are in fact as dangerous as those in their 20s. Dozens of scientific reports from here and around the world suggest that this is so. Currently, 21% of all drivers killed on our roads each year are over 60. And as the number of elderly people increases and the volume of traffic spirals upwards, that figure could clearly rise dramatically. So now the question being asked is, should we force the elderly to retire and retest? Despite consistent government refusals, there is a growing lobby committed to radical new rules to end a system they see as dangerously antiquated.
For many years now, at the Guild of Experienced Motorists, we've felt that a driving licence is something that you should earn, and it's a privilege to have, rather than something that's a right for you to have. And we're against the issuing of licences for life. We'd like to see a reassessment for driving throughout one's driving career. Our faculties obviously get worse as we get older, and that's why it's so important that we assess drivers on a regular basis to make sure they are up to the job in hand.
Devon, retirement mecca of the southwest. Pretty it may be, but possibly dangerous too. In 1990 alone, 20 old people were killed here, 147 injured. Worried, the council began close monitoring. For the first time, they began to understand the risk areas, and they took swift action.
Okay, that's done very nicely. Just glance across to your left now, if you can, just to make sure there's nobody over there. Keep the car moving out towards the left of the roundabout so that you can exclude the possibility of anybody coming up on your left. It keeps it nice and clear for you.
They set up a highly confidential voluntary reassessment scheme for older drivers called 60 Plus. The private test highlights faults. It's necessary because they've found that the elderly are 3 times more likely to be fatally injured in a road accident than any other age group.
They're always difficult, especially the busy ones. Yes. And they don't get any quieter either as we go along. But you maintained good progress and kept up quite a good speed as we were driving along. That was nice to see, and not sort of slowing down. And yet you were actually aware of what was happening, so that you were.
Risk 1 is junctions. 2/3 of all these crashes happen when an old person moves out too slowly, unable to judge the speed and intentions of another driver. Risk 2 comes through slowing of reaction times.
It does take longer to process information when you are older. I mean, the average reaction time for somebody reacting to an emergency is about 0.6 of a second if you're a young person. That can be up to 10 times as high with older people. And of course, in some situations, that can be a matter of life or death.
This busy roundabout is a case in point, a real accident black spot. In 3 years, 27% of all the crashes have been the fault of old people. Many take the wrong exit, find themselves on the motorway, and then actually reverse back down into traffic, and that's common. A third risk is inability to move easily to see all round the car. It can mean difficulty in carrying out basic manoeuvres. The Devon schemes had wide publicity, but of 250,000 elderly, only 100 have come forward in 18 months. It seems they refuse to see the problem.
That is the challenge of our campaign. We haven't yet cracked it. And I would look to some cues from perhaps national government and from society as a whole to give more indications to the older driver that this is a problem, that they must take it seriously.
So how safe a combination is age and experience really? A recent Gallup survey found that 26% of over 65s admit to doing over 80 miles an hour. Another study showed they were more often to blame for accidents, and yet another that they're more likely to be on medication, but most don't know what effect it'll have. This psychologist is the only person in this country to have conducted any type of genuine driving test experiment with the elderly.
We asked 100 people to take a standard driving test. 50 of these had had a stroke and 50 were their able-bodied controls. And we found there was no significant difference between the stroke and the able-bodied group in the numbers who failed the test or passed the test. But there were differences in the age groups who passed and failed. And there were only 9% of those under 60 years who failed the test. And there were 29% of those 60 years plus who failed the test.
And why do you think it was such a big proportion of those older people who failed?
The reasons why people failed the